Dr. Califf, thank you very much for joining in and speaking to CNBC-TV18. It's your first trip to India as an FDA official, and separately, you're here to celebrate 15 years of the FDA in India. You've met a multiple number of people in India while you're here, a multiple number of stakeholders. What's your experience been?
It's been tremendous. I've been to India a number of times before, but not in an official capacity. Saw a lot of people that I've known in the past. That was fantastic, but also met a number of new people. A lot is happening in India right now, and it's very exciting to work together with people in India on our common issues.
Well, one of the big things is that India is the pharmacy to the world. We have the largest number of USFDA compliant facilities outside of the US. But still, we do face a lot of compliance issues. What do you think is the biggest challenge that India faces?
Well, we have a market which is growing all over the world, and including your own market here in India. And so your industry is serving a lot of people with a lot of expectations. If we just look at the generic drug world in the United States, it's over 90% of our prescriptions now are generics, and India is supplying a very large proportion of those drugs. So expectations are high. Constructing a manufacturing system that delivers the goods reliably, predictably, month after month is a big challenge for anyone. And I think as parts of the Indian economy are gaining steam and picking up, more and more people are getting into the business. That creates challenges in creating those systems that we can all depend on.
But what do you think would probably be the biggest challenge that we face when it comes to compliance? The reason I ask is that post-COVID-19, we've seen a surge in terms of Form 483s, OAIs, or official action indicated statuses, even import alerts. Is that only because there was a lot of pent-up inspections that needed to take place, or is there a slip in terms of compliance post-COVID-19?
Well, that's a great question, and we don't really have a clear answer to that because there are several variables changing at the same time. What we do know is that we're seeing, in particular firms, issues both in manufacturing and in the clinical data that we need. Because when you make a pill, it's not just do you make the pill with the same chemicals in it, is that pill bioactive? Does it release the ingredients into our bloodstream so it has the effect? I can think about this in terms of myself. I have high blood pressure and high cholesterol, like most men my age. I'm almost 72 now, and I'm very dependent on 4 generic drugs that probably do come from India. And it's not just does the pill have the chemical in it, it's that when I take the pill, does it actually control my blood pressure? So the measurements done in people, in human studies, are also very important. We're seeing issues across the board. They're not unique to India. All countries have the same problems. This is hard work, and it's very difficult to get it right. But we have seen a flurry of issues in India that have demanded our attention.
And what are those kind of issues which have demanded your attention, which are probably surfacing in India in the past 2 to 3 years?
So much of reliable manufacturing and clinical studies is really designing the process correctly and then demonstrating to yourself and to others that you're doing what you said you were going to do reliably. So if you say we're going to produce a drug that has chemicals within a certain standard, then you have to show that when you actually manufacture the drug, you are falling within that standard. And it has to be done reproducibly. If you find that you're not within that standard, as painful as it may be, you have to go back and not put that drug on the market and go back and fix the problem. And so we're seeing some lapses in areas such as that. And in the clinical studies, these are difficult studies to do, and you have to measure things very carefully and just at the right time, and we're seeing some issues there also.
So one of the key issues that the U.S. is facing is of drug shortages, which is at a multi-year high. How much of it is because of non-compliant facilities?
Well, let's go back to the beginning here. First, I have to say this is an amazing opportunity, right? Because as our population ages in the U.S. and with 7.6 billion other people in the world, the demand for these drugs is only going to grow tremendously. So India, as a leading manufacturer, has a very bright future here. And we are seeing exemplary firms that are doing a tremendous and reliable job. But what happens is these drugs are also being sold at a very low margin. Remember, the concept behind generic drugs is you're making a copy of what was already made and sold as an innovator drug under patent protection. When the patent runs out, now you're in the generic phase. And the whole issue there is, can you reproducibly make the same drug, and then the competition is on price. And when the economics are not right, the firms may find that it's very difficult to invest in the technology and the people that they need. There's also competition for the best people. The ones who really know how to do it are valuable, just like any other aspect of life. So all of this together creates a situation where if we do an inspection and find a problem, and the company needs to stop making the drug while it fixes its issues, then a shortage occurs in the U.S. because the supply chain has not been built to be as resilient as it should be. A lot of attention on this now in the U.S. I didn't expect to spend so much of my time on this when I came back to be commissioner for the second time. But it's a really critical issue for the U.S. right now.
So how exactly does India fit into that puzzle then? Because there is an expectation that there is a strengthening of supply chains when it comes to APIs, formulations, which needs to be undertaken, especially post-COVID-19, in order to ensure critical supply of drugs is continuous and something like COVID-19 doesn't impact it in the future. What is the U.S. doing? Where does India play a part?
Well, first of all, the relationship with India is long-standing, but it's recently been stronger than ever. These are powerful economies with strengths that match very well and a lot of good relationships among people. And so we don't want to be totally dependent on India or any other country, but we see India as a critical part of the supply chain for the U.S. and for the world. So you'll hear in the U.S. about onshoring, bringing a lot of the manufacturing activity back to the U.S. None of us think that it should be completely brought back to the U.S. There should be an equilibrium. So, I mean, a key concept in supply chain resilience is, what if there's a tornado in the U.S. or a monsoon in India that wipes out a plant for a period of time? We need to be able to depend on relying on each other to pick up that deficit and make up for it without an interruption of supply. I mean, after all, these drugs are life-saving for many people. And as I say, I'm dependent too on good medication.
You know, it's interesting, Dr. Califf, that you've brought up that point about moving manufacturing back to the U.S., because there was a U.S. government report recently as well, which indicated that there's too much reliance of manufacturing of drugs on India and China, and that there has to be some sort of indigenous manufacturing to take place. How is the USFDA tackling that specific issue of over-reliance on India and China? India probably more.
Well, one of the difficulties for us at the FDA is we don't control the economic issues, so it's much broader than the FDA. We only have a certain role to play. Our main job is to make sure that when a drug does come into the U.S. from outside, that it's safe and effective. The supply part of it, we do a lot to fix supply problems when they occur. But the question of what's the right balance is a very important one. This is being debated not so much within the U.S., but within other parts of the U.S. government. And I would just say in general, we all became overly reliant on China. I mean, China has been a growing country. They focus very much on the basic starting materials and the API, as you said. We need to see that distributed more around the world. India, I think in all of our planning, will be a dominant component of that. So it's not that we want to take it from India. What I see is the overall pie is getting bigger. India will maintain a very big part of that pie. But every country, including the U.S., should ensure that if something happens, that they have the capability, for national security reasons, of producing their own drugs. We've talked a lot about devices, too, while I've been here, another important part of your biomedical economy. You have a lot of very inventive people here, and a very similar story there. We would see the device and digital communities in India obviously very strong and growing. We just need to make sure U.S. doesn't depend completely on other countries, so if something happens, we have none of our own capability.
So will India be a dominant supplier to the U.S., say, 5 years from now? Can we still expect that?
I certainly expect that to be the case. I have no doubt about it. And, you know, we're celebrating the 15th year of our India office at the FDA. We have really talented and dedicated team here working with your industry. And I just loved a comment in a visit we made yesterday to one of the firms. I asked the question, how often should we inspect? Because we're going to inspect more. And it's not to punish the industry, it's more to develop a system where there are no surprises on any side. And the answer was, come anytime you want. That's the answer that we'd really like to see.
And will those inspections be unannounced? Will it be more independent translators? Because the USFDA seems to be facing that issue when it comes to India as well as China. Announced inspections 12 or 9 weeks in advance, so they have time to prepare, and things such as translators who are not independent. So are those factors going to be considered now?
I feel like a real expert here because in my former life, I've been inspected by the FDA multiple times and on the boards of companies that have undergone inspections. And I think a mixture of announced and unannounced is important, and you'll see more unannounced inspections. Because as the gentleman said yesterday in one of the Indian firms, if you're always observing good practice, it shouldn't matter when an inspector comes. It's just your normal routine being observed. And we've seen in India that there's every capability of doing this at an extraordinarily high level. Also mentioned that digital technology could be very important here because a lot of what you need to know to assure that there's high quality now is being monitored within the firms with digital technology. In the future, we should be able to plug right into that digital information and keep track of the quality as we go. Then the inspections are very focused on issues where we may have concerns or want to learn about something.
What are your thoughts with regards to what has taken place recently in India, though? In the past year odd, there have been multiple incidents which have taken place with Indian companies when it comes to diethylene glycol and ethylene glycol contamination in cough syrups. And separately, there have been a case of eye drops in the US also, which have been substandard. How do you deal with those issues? Does it affect your view of compliance in India?
I would say it affects my view, but it's not that my view has changed. It just strengthens the concept that there should be one standard for all pharmaceuticals, regardless of the country that it's going. We have confidence that when it comes to generic drugs, for example, the drugs getting into the U.S. are very high quality because they go through so many steps of checking. There was a bit of a loophole on the eye drops for that particular type of material, and we're getting Congress to change the laws so that we do have more authority to intervene there. But what happened with the ethylene glycol contamination, those were drugs going to other countries under a different standard than we use. And you know, it's tragic enough when adults die from something like this, but children is just unbearable. So all this does is just strengthen the concept that we need to have a very robust regulatory system, high quality inspectors, a lot better information exchange, and more than anything else, I mean, you have 1.5 billion people here or so in India who need high quality pharmaceuticals too, and so there's so much in it. It's not just about us in the U.S. There's so much in it for India to get this right.
Well, you know, just on that point with regards to diethylene glycol as well as ethylene glycol, the view is that the supply chain is probably contaminated with the substandard ingredients, and there's a possibility that we could see further incidents in the future simply because we can't track the supply chain so closely. As an FDA, as the head of the USFDA, what would your opinion be on that, and how would one probably try to curtail it?
Well, I have opinions, and then I have what I'm legally allowed to do. And my opinion on this is very clear. There is no reason in 2023 why we shouldn't have digital access to the entire supply chain. I would envision a map on a wall that's digital where you could see all the material and the amount of material as it goes from being, I remember that the starting materials for most drugs are really petrochemicals, much like you would find in other things that are made that are non-medical. But we should be able to keep track of how much there is and where it goes, and the testing that's done can be integrated with that information. This is also important because let's suppose somewhere in that node, I'll use the example of a tornado because a Pfizer plant that's just a few miles from where I live was hit by a tornado and took out a very large supply of generic drugs. Let's say that happens. For us to recover, being able to look and see where the supplies are and put them together is important. But it's also true that since these materials go through the supply chain, that if you found a root cause problem early in the supply chain, you could deal with it much more quickly in terms of where all the different aliquots of that supply have gone.
Will the U.S. face a shortage because of the tornado hitting the Pfizer plant?
It looks like we've averted it. And I mean, one of the things about the FDA that I admire so much, remember, the commissioner is a political appointment and only for a short period of time. Most 18,000 people are full-time FDA employees who do this work. We have an entire team of people who do nothing but deal with the possibility of a drug shortage. And in this case, there was an immediate response. The company did a great job, and our people pitched in to make sure that we could recover as quickly as possible. If there's a shortage of one drug, there may be another that's just as good, or someone else may make it. All that involves our people at FDA and the industry working together. So we can handle this thing. And in fact, we're doing it about 200 times a year now in the U.S. And then about 30 to 40 times per year, a real shortage occurs. And I'm hoping that we can bring this to zero, taking into account all the things we've talked about today and fixing them.
So you've met a lot of people from industry in the past in your trip to India. When it comes to compliance, do you think that there's been a formidable change which has taken place? Because one of the key issues used to be data integrity, data falsification, which a lot of Indian companies were hit by, say, maybe a couple of years ago. Is that resolved and behind us?
I put it like this. A lot of the companies we've worked with for a long time have come up to a standard which is every bit as good as anywhere else in the world. And so we're seeing a lot of very high quality activity in the industry here in India. But you also have a lot of new people getting into the industry, and there's a significant learning curve there. And there's a real need, with your vast resources that you now have for education, there's a real need for training a large number of people who really start out with an understanding of all these disciplines that have to come together: chemistry, biology, human studies, medicine. It's a complicated set of issues where you need the whole team to be at the table in order for it to function. It's kind of like, I don't know, CNBC. You've got to have producers and anchors and the people rolling the film. They've all got to work together as a team, and that's what we need. So
particularly for compliance, and I take your point, particularly for compliance, a lot has to do with the top-down culture, from what emits from the management on the top and what goes down into the plant. Has that changed in India? Because a lot of the compliance issues we used to face was also related to the culture of the Indian people.
Well, you know, I'm almost 72. I feel like I've seen every situation, and I don't think there's anything unique about India. In other words, these problems exist everywhere, and I would react a little bit to top-down. I certainly believe that the leaders have to exude quality in their thinking and an absolute commitment to integrity. But there's also a very important bottom-up component of this. If the people who are in the workplace have a deep ethic of integrity and honesty, even if it hurts, that's also very important. So I don't think this is something that's unique to India, but there's a lot to work on here to get that balance right. And, you know, simply put, it's something that happens in every business I've been involved in healthcare. You know, I'm a doctor, and we've been through this in healthcare. What happens if someone makes a mistake? Do you cover it up, or do you talk about it and then fix the problem so that it doesn't occur again? And in a company, if there's a manufacturing problem, sometimes that puts severe strain on the finances of the company. And in every business, there's a tendency, if the bosses don't say, we have to be honest here, the workers are in a very difficult situation of speaking out, which is threatening their jobs. And so, again, not unique to India, but it's definitely an issue here, and I think it has gotten better. We've met with your leaders, not just your government officials, but your industry leaders while we've been here. One thing we want to do from our FDA perspective is reward the people who do display this commitment to integrity and quality. You know, it's one thing to make a pill one time that is good, but to make a pill continuously over time that's always good means that you have to have things in place in your company, and the management and the expectations and the education of employees. We saw one yesterday where a number of employees have gone and gotten PhDs at the expense of the company. You know, that's a wonderful component that you know, we should all aspire to have in place.
But while India has been you know, the front leader when it comes to generics, we haven't really been able to make inroads when it comes to R&D as well as innovative drugs. Do you think that that would probably be the next leg of growth based on what you've seen?
Definitely. I mean, a lot of smart people here. And, you know, I worked at Google in between my two stints at FDA. My leader was Sundar, who, and if you look at Microsoft, same thing. These are, you know, you produce a lot of smart people who don't just have to make the copies of other drugs. And many of your people have gone to the U.S. or Switzerland and have been the chemists that have designed the innovator drugs. So it's definitely part of India's future. But I hope in that effort we don't lose sight of the fact that so much of the world will be dependent on inexpensive, highly reproducible generic drugs. The common diseases that are causing most of the death and disability in the world: heart disease, diabetes, cancer, neurologic disease at the end of life. We have small molecule reproducible medicines that India is in the best position in the world to produce at a reasonable price. So I'm all for the complex biologics, the innovator drugs, go for it. But the world is depending on India for this special, very large category of life-saving medication.
Well, Dr. Califf, thank you very much for joining in and speaking to CNBC-TV18. We hope you had a very successful trip to India.
Thank you. I had a great time, and I feel very optimistic about our future together.